Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Hi, it's Matt Kirkner back once again as your host for the Tech Ed Podcast. This week we have another phenomenal guest for you. It's an individual with whom I had an opportunity to spend quite a bit of time several weeks ago as we traveled around the United States looking at best practices in STEM and advanced manufacturing education. Got to know him over that period of time, really had some great discussions, and I'm excited to expound on those today with Tim Hood, who serves as president of Mid-Michigan College. Tim, let's start out by welcoming you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Matt. And I really enjoyed our time together. And we were talking earlier about how the discussions really helped us both think about things that are so important to the communities and economic systems, and all of the things that enhance our quality of life are connected with what we're talking about, which makes it very important to us.
Very important indeed. I love free thinkers. I love people who aren't afraid to question the status quo. We're going to talk all about that today with Tim Hood. I'm going to start, though, Tim, with a discussion around something wholly unrelated to education. You and I got into a really interesting discussion, which I think told me a lot about who you are as a person, kind of what makes you tick, what your interests are. Again, had nothing to do with the world of higher education or education in general. But we talked for a good period of time about the gigantic fish pond that you put on your property in Southern Illinois several years ago. I just found it so fascinating. And I want to start in kind of an unusual spot. Let's talk a little bit about that fish pond, about why you did it, about what it's all about.
I had always dreamt of having a small farm. Family was lower middle class. Father was a plumber and a pipe fitter. I was one of 6 children, and we didn't have a lot of extra money. So the entertainment for us was hunting and fishing and things that didn't cost a lot of money. And we ate a lot of the game and fish that we harvested. So I was finally at a point early in my business career where I had the means to start purchasing property. And I was riding my ATV up on one of the highest points on the farm. And I looked out over this valley where 2 hills came close together. And I just visualized this big pond, small lake. It's now a 6.5 acre body of water. And within a year, I had a neighbor that had heavy equipment, and I had actually purchased some of the land from him. So it was convenient. And without moving a whole lot of dirt, we were able to sculpt a dam between those 2 hills and capture over 800 acres of watershed that flowed through that waterway. So it's a dream come true for me. And then I wanted it to be full of fish. So I'm kind of conservative and careful with investments. And the way we ended up stocking that lake was by catching fish in state lakes totally legally and never above the limit. But we would bring those fish back in industrial-sized live well tanks and release them in my lake. And we're catching the offspring of those that we originally stocked in there almost 30 years ago.
I love that story. And I wanted to begin with it, Tim, because I think it really does tell a lot about who you are. First of all, the upbringing that you mentioned, obviously that's at the core of who you are and the values that you hold. The ability to take an ATV up on the highest point of a property and see what could be. And seeing what could be is important, not just in terms of building a bass pond or a fish pond, but also in terms of looking at the world of education, any world for that matter, and looking at what could be. And then I think the fact that you built it yourself and that you weren't afraid to get your hands dirty, that you weren't afraid to partner with a neighbor to figure out a way to create this amazing 6.5 acre pond on your property. That's so cool. It's unconventional without question. I don't know if there's another college president in the United States who's done something like that or exactly like that. I'm going to assume that there isn't. Another way that I would say that you're unconventional in terms of your leadership at Mid-Michigan College is that you didn't start in the world of education. You mentioned in the last answer to the last question, your business background, and you started in the automotive sales market. And because of that, I think you have a strong entrepreneurial bent. And, they're again talking about what could be rather than what is. Tell us about that background and how it influences your role at the college today.
Sure. And I'm proud of that background because I learned so much about customer service and about business, about team building, and leadership that allows team building to flourish. Without it getting into great detail, I needed a job that paid more than minimum wage, which I had 3 to 4 of. The first year I was trying to put myself through college, and when the scholarships ran out, again, working class family, I didn't want to burden them. So I was one of these folks that was going to work for about a year, save money to go back to college. Well, I got into the car business for a reputable and a good car dealer. At that time, I had a small showroom and a gravel lot, and we're selling 20 to 30 new and used cars per month. Over the next decade, we built that business into 4 dealerships, having in and out more than 8 new car franchises, and basically increased the volume and revenue tenfold. And to be part of that success story and that the collection of efforts that it took to do that in a very competitive and a very tough market, because this was late 70s and 80s. And fuel crisis, first Great Recession since the Great Depression. Lots of things were working against us. Cars were not built as well as they are now, and gas prices were terrible. And we were selling new and used cars when interest rates, APRs, were double digits. I can remember sometimes 15, 16, 17, 18%. To be able to survive, and not only survive, but to prosper in that market and do what we were able to do. I learned a lot about business, about entrepreneurship, and especially about customer service. And this is what I bring to education that Matt was alluding to. We need to bring that entrepreneurial spirit, that can-do spirit into education and become more flexible, become more nimble, and become more driven by how many different ways there are to provide excellent customer service. And in many cases, that goes far beyond what we're accustomed and most comfortable with doing, which has been so traditional for so many years in higher education.
Well, and this is exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about unconventional. To hear a college president talk about things like entrepreneurship in terms of how we run the college, making sure that we're responsive to customers, understanding who our customers are, having that can-do attitude, being willing to, dare I say, disrupt a little bit, a model that perhaps is in need of some disruption. What a crazy, crazy time you went through during those periods of time, and finding ways to grow, finding ways to invest in your business, growing to 4 dealerships, 8 franchises, 10x growth over a period of time. You're certainly no stranger to that kind of change. And I think it's particularly because you're willing to take a new look at the model, willing to disrupt it a little bit. So you've got this experience running and growing and expanding small to mid-sized businesses. You know what it takes to create disruption in a market like that, Tim. Now, since you've joined the world of education, you've been, and this goes back a little bit of time now, a positive disruptor. We use the term disruption in the most positive sense. It's even right in the intro every week to the Tech Ed podcast. We like people who aren't afraid to try new things. As you look at higher education, whether it's technical college, community college, university level education, you've got experience in every one of those. What are 3 ways that higher education needs to be disrupted in the next decade?
I mentioned flexibility. We have to find more ways to serve more people where they are, with modes of delivery and instruction that is accessible, that is inexpensive, in many cases subsidized. And I know that's a dirty word for some people, but of all the things that we do subsidize, education is the very best in terms of ROI investment that we can make. And we need to be reminded of that, not only as educators, but as business leaders. I think education, for the most part, also needs to embrace partnerships with business and industry. And when I began my transition from business to higher education, it was very polarized. It was us against them, and not a lot of collaboration and name calling and whose fault is this, and we've got to get past, and we are. We're making a lot of progress here. We're working as community colleges especially more closely with business and industry and economic development than we ever have before. But that's not to say, and this would be the third thing I would remind us all of, and to my fellow educators who I have learned so much from. And I am a collection of worldview elements that come from so many great leaders in the world of education and in the world of business and industry. And I wouldn't trade anything for the education I got from those individuals, most of which was not as much in college classrooms as it was on the job and in those internship opportunities that I had. Those experiential learning opportunities. Our delivery of instruction has to become more and more experiential, more hands-on, and the development of curricula for that training and education needs to be more closely connected with the professions and the industries that will be hiring these individuals to make sure that we are aligning what we are teaching with the most state-of-the-art expertise, equipment, and resources. We have to get past, as educators, feeling like if our students do not come and complete a series of degrees up to and including baccalaureate and graduate degrees, nothing against that, and I'm so glad that I have mine. They were life-changing, but they're not for everybody. We have to have more pathways with degrees and certificates, customized and specialized training. That's not to say you're done after this. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm still finishing my doctorate degree at 62 years old. I'll never stop taking classes. I'll never stop learning as long as I have that ability. And we want to say to our stakeholders, we want to be your college, not just for transfer programs and upper level degrees. We want to be your college for learning, for completion of both credit and non-credit programs, whatever you need to know to enrich your lives, to take your career to that next level, or perhaps to a different arena. We want to be there for those students of all ages, and we certainly want to do everything we've always done. And this is where some people worry about what I'm suggesting. So are we stepping away from transfer programs and 2+2 programs and preparing students for grad? Absolutely not. We can still do all of that even better than we're doing it now once we capitalize on resources and partnerships and collaboration that bring us more to work with to serve more people in more ways, not just for those career and technical programs, but for everything that we do. The future in education is serving more people in more ways, meeting them where they are, and not being so caught up in if this doesn't end up in a baccalaureate or even an associate or farther yet a doctoral degree, then somehow we failed. We have not failed. And we will still do all of those things and contribute to all those programs as much as we ever have. We're just going to start doing more at the ground level, and we're going to start doing more that is out of the traditional classroom and in the workplace environment.
And in the process of doing that, as you put it, serving more people in more ways, meeting them where they are, which speaks back to the flexibility comment. There kind of brought that whole discussion full circle around flexibility, partnerships with business and industry, the importance of on-the-job training, internships, work-based learning. Boy, I'm a huge, huge advocate for that. I say often, I learned as much in the jobs that I had during my educational pathway as I did in education. And I don't mean that, to disparage education at all. I had great education experience, but learned so much working as well. I worked full-time my senior year of college. I actually took a pay cut when I went into the workforce because the job I had in college paid me so well that when I got into my professional career, I had to start over a little bit. So it's kind of interesting how all that can work. Very, very interesting thoughts on how we can disrupt education in the next 10 years. And I think it kind of plays into the next question that I have. You've got this just amazing experience in business, and I mean this in a good way. It's not just I had this business career and then I went into education. You were responsible for growing organizations, for increasing sales, for making strategic decisions that the business model was going to live or die by. That's real business experience and really, really impressive. Gives you a perspective on the world of industrial employers and relationships that many in your position may not have. What is it, would you say, that community colleges don't get about how to build really good relationships with their business and industry clients, with their industrial employers? What could they learn about that?
I love this question because it's so important for people to understand how valuable these relationships can be. And let me just start by summarizing that the old-fashioned way of looking at those partnerships and the work that is generated through workforce development, customized business and industry training programs, some of the research that I use in my own writing cites studies that indicate that by and large, a lot of perceptions about that work among the academic community is that those programs were like the stepchildren of the institution. And how inappropriate that is and how unfair that is. I also worry about the divide between what are considered academic programs and what are considered career and technical programs. And the concern that I have about that is that whenever someone would think or write or say that somehow those career and technical programs are somehow inferior to the academic programs or the more elite programs, and I'm exaggerating here a little bit because sometimes it's not that far off from that. Community colleges, by and large, get the fact that career and technical is just as important as those more traditional liberal arts and sciences programs. I would argue, and our team here would argue, that the greatest potential students and enrollment comes from those very programs and from those adults that just need a little bit more, or maybe that first degree, or maybe that next degree, or maybe that certification that allows them to do more or to raise into a supervisory level position. These are not stepchildren. These are one of the primary missions when community colleges were put in motion by the Community College Act. And so many good men and women have very successful careers because of programs that weren't available before community colleges say, not only can we prepare for traditional degrees, but we can also prepare students in short order for specialized skilled trades, more technical allied health programs, certificates that can be done within 1 or 2 years. And then what we're doing more and more of is making those stackable, so that one badge or certificate can be a building block for a pathway that would go on for a lifetime. And again, we want to be that college for life.
Well, and I think it's important that you set up a model in which you can be that college for life. You know, a mentor of mine had a conversation with a couple of years ago. That individual said, look, if you turn the clock forward 20 years, most of the people that are working in, for instance, manufacturing 20 years from now are people that are working in manufacturing today. In other words, you know, in as much as it's important as we look at the shortage of skilled talent in the Midwest, it's important for us to look at how do we inspire students toward careers in industry? How do we give students in a community technical college the right skills and the right opportunities to be successful when they get to industry? The other thing that's really, really important is how do we take this whole sea of people who are already working in manufacturing and will be in another 20 years and give them the skills and the talents and abilities and competencies they'll need to be successful in a world that's going to change and is already changing. And the manufacturing skills of today are not the manufacturing skills of 5 years ago. And those 5 to 10 years from now are not the ones of today. So I think that really speaks to that answer that you just offered us, Tim, which is really thinking about how we create an environment where we're valuing continuing professional education, valuing lifelong learning in the same way that we value traditional academic degrees. So I think a really insightful and a good answer to that last question. Another mentor of mine often uses the line that we get further in life by asking the right questions than we ever do by giving the right answer. I want to talk a little bit about conversations with industrial employers, given your passion and experience both in the area of business and industry. When we have conversations as educators with industrial employers, there's those boilerplate questions that kind of come up right out of the blocks. Tell me about your company. Tell me about your workforce needs. How many employers do you have? And then you really start to dig in. If you're good at this, you really start to dig into what's really important to those industrial employers. As you have those conversations about their needs and their concerns, what are some of the answers? What are some of the responses that you get about those needs that maybe don't surface in those original kind of top of the surface questions they don't really surface until you get a little bit deeper? What do you hear from employers around that?
Before going into any type of partnership or consulting arrangement or training shared program, we always do extensive assessment about the culture, and no two organizations, even cookie cutter franchise operations, have the same culture, because the culture is primarily, of course, determined by the people and their relationships. So we need to assess that culture, and to the questions need to be geared towards not only helping us hear that culture described, and then the SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and things that would be opportunistic and things that would somehow hold them back. Those tend to come out in conversations. I would argue that we need to have those conversations not only with leadership, but also boots on the ground positions. And some of the most insightful projects that I've had the privilege of working on, the assessment lasted almost as long as the initial training period did, because those employees, those participants who are going to benefit from this work, notice when we are taking the time to learn more about them, their individual concerns, also their hopes and aspirations and goals, and you almost begin to get immediate buy-in. One of the projects that I've cited in a lot of research that I've been working on and will be in my dissertation is that the company hired about 400 people, and we began by training the 62 team leaders and co-leaders. And there was 2 for each team and each shift. They worked round the clock, 3 shifts. Each shift had about 8 to 12 co-leaders or leaders always on staff. We started by training these 62. The first 2 modules or class gatherings, we gave them a survey in terms of topics. And this is what I want to build to in terms of what do they always point to as the greatest needs. We, with management, had determined what they thought the greatest needs were, but I suggested to them, let's ask the rank and file before we say we're going to work on these top 3. Amazingly, they picked almost perfect rank order for the top 5 topics that they wanted to work on together in this professional development series. And number 1 is almost always communication. And there are many, many offshoots of that. That's my specialty, so I was so pleased to hear that. But communication in terms of team building, problem solving, conflict management, inadequate communication, grapevine flourishing because there's not enough formal communication to keep people informed, all of the traditional challenges and things that go with, well, we haven't really thought much about this. And the average tenure for the men and women who worked there was above 15 years. Many of them had been there 20 and 30 years and had this brain trust of experience and knowledge and opinions that they didn't feel was respected in most cases. By involving them from the get-go. Now, when management saw this starting to happen, they got really interested. And the progress we made with those team leaders and co-leaders was significant enough that plant management decided that they wanted to put all 400, nearly 400 employees through similar training. Guess who helped us deliver that training? The leaders and the co-leaders who had been through it, which was a very nice buy-in. It was a very nice reward for their efforts. It was a very nice way for management and the college to say, we're listening, we care, and customer service means not only delivering a good educational product, but having the walkaways and the outcomes of it be something that lasts longer and isn't going to go on the shelf and be forgotten by the end of the quarter.
Isn't it amazing how far we can get if we actually ask the people that are doing the work, ask the people that are right in the middle of it, and asking them, what do they want to know? And what do they want to learn? Certainly communication at the top of the list, probably not surprising, but what is surprising a little bit to me is the tenure of those individuals. What a huge bastion of information and experience and continuous improvement ideas that is kind of sitting with those folks. And then having those individuals responsible for delivering that learning to the other 338 employees of that company. What a great way to get automatic credibility with the rest of that group when they're hearing from their contemporaries and people that are working right alongside them. So really, really interesting approach and really speaks to, I think, when you ask the right questions in the world of business and industry and really dig deep into what's important, how, the magic that can come of that. I also love the fact that you started that last answer by assessing the culture of the organization. I think back on the writings of Patrick Lencioni, who says that culture is really the answer to the 3 questions. Where are we going? Why do we exist? And what attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors are absolutely necessary. And I think in the numerous decades that I've spent with all kinds of different manufacturing companies, kind of understanding the answers to those questions really speaks to where an organization is going. And I think helps us break down barriers in terms of making progress and understanding what is going to work and maybe what isn't going to work so we can get a head start on solutions that are going to make the most difference. When we talk about breaking down barriers, one of the things that I like to do, Tim, is break down barriers in terms of thinking. And so many times, especially when we're working with people in higher education, maybe a little more in the universities than in our technical and community colleges, you get a lot of reasons why people don't want to change. A lot of reasons why they feel like change is impossible or it's too much work or fill in the blank of this legislative body or this commission isn't going to let us do that. If we were to remove all those barriers, if you could ignore every rule, every regulation, every state statute, and just focus on serving the workforce needs of private industry, How would that program feel to a private employer?
It would feel like finally someone's listening. It would feel like maybe I don't have to worry as much as I have been. It would feel like maybe we can grow this business more than we thought we could. And I think those would be three very positive ways to react to those opportunities.
So more communication, less worrying, more growth. Who could possibly say no to those three things? And that's kind of what happens when we break down barriers, and good things can certainly happen as a result of that. Now, in the last question that I just asked him, we took state statutes out of the equation. We took governmental regulation out of the equation. But the truth of the matter is that one of the key drivers in our community college system is decisions that are made at the state level. What would you say is most important for state legislatures, for governors of our states? What's most important for them to understand how their decisions as it relates to budgeting and guiding education influence the ability of a community college to develop the workforce of the future?
Another question that is right on target for today's world and what we're dealing with in terms of both challenges and opportunities. And I work closely with legislators. I try to be on a first name basis with as many of them as possible at the state level, at the regional level, and in DC. So that there's no substitute for that. I want them to know who we are, and we certainly want to know who they are and how we can help do things that are in the best interest of those we mutually serve. I would say this: community colleges, by and large, and now I'm going to cite Illinois and Michigan primarily because those are the states where I've had the most administrative opportunities at the executive level. Both states serve more than twice as many students as four-year universities. In Illinois, it's more like 3 times as many collectively. But the proportion of the funding formula is reversed. We get less than half of, in some cases more like a third of, the state funding that large public universities get. Now, I know they're more expensive to operate, but they're also more expensive to attend. And I'm not beating up universities. Thank goodness for the one. I've only been to one as a student, but it served me very well. And I couldn't have done what I'm doing now had it not been for that experience. But by and large, community colleges are a better investment. We do more with less, and we could do so much more if we could find a way. And I'm not saying take it away from the universities, but I'm saying take it away from things that don't have the ROI that education has. Pay us now or pay us later. And the more people that go underemployed and unemployed with poor quality of life, the more social and civic problems and illnesses we're going to have. And the remedy for this is education and workforce development and business and industry coming together saying we need each other.
And especially today when there seems to be such a mismatch between the skills available in the workforce and the skills in demand by employers, myriad solutions to that. But what a great opportunity if we look at it from the positive sense to upskill an entire generation of Americans towards the types of jobs that are going to exist in the future, in many cases already exist today, and certainly making worthwhile, well thought out investments that are tied to ROI, a term that you've used several times over the course of our discussions, return on investment, making sure that as we're investing those dollars, there's a return on that investment. As we continue to look at new ways to educate the next generation of the American workforce, I think one of the things that we're seeing, and you've mentioned it already, in terms of how we're changing our way of educating the next level of the workforce and also in validating that individuals have certain skills and competencies, is this whole idea of stackable credentials. And, I know you're a believer that as much as technical diplomas, associate degrees, as valuable as they are, and nobody's going to argue that they're not, these stackable credentials that are gaining more and more traction in terms of state funding, in terms of acceptance and value on the part of industrial employers and others, it's really a trend that is in many cases revolutionizing education. You and I recently had a discussion all about the fact that your college, Mid-Michigan College, participating in the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. You're a really, really active member. But one of the unique aspects of SACA is that the competencies, as you and I have discussed, are 100% industry driven and genuinely independent. Do you see brand independence as a future trend in industrial certifications? And where do you see that whole aspect of third-party certifications going?
Well, I think it has to be part of the equation. And in the technical world of industry, it's changing and advancing so rapidly, and that will continue to escalate exponentially. Traditional academic institutions, it takes, for the most part, and we're changing, we're getting better at this, but it takes us too long to develop new curricula. And usually we're at least a year out with an idea before it can go into a classroom, especially if it's going to be part of a program. The kinds of programs that you just mentioned and certifications are ones that can be delivered and changed within months. And the stackables, the menu is a living menu that keeps growing as the industry grows and evolves and moves forward. So what I love about that is the flexibility to be able to remain on the cutting edge. And of course, business and industry is all about timeliness. And I think as educators, we need to make timeliness more important in our strategic planning. And I'll bring one more thing into it that kind of goes back to the culture aspect and how important that is to all of this. Someone was describing the difference and importance between paying attention to and working with culture as compared to strategic planning processes. And this individual thought about that for a moment. And I'll never forget what she said. Culture eats strategic planning for lunch.
I love it.
I don't know. Do you know where that comes from? You've heard that from before.
I have heard it before, and I admit that I don't know who originally came up with that, but it's a beautiful, beautiful quote without question.
So to do one without the other, but what's so nice about a culture that embraces this and gets it and realizes that it's not a threat to our existence or to our mission. It's a way of enhancing what we do and being more current and being more timely and being more salient.
So culture is so very important to any organization. Culture is also important in communities. Now, I've spent time in Central Michigan. I actually had the opportunity at the request of one of your contemporaries to keynote the annual meeting of the Central Michigan Manufacturers Association. I think it was about a year ago last month. One of the handful of things that I really treasured during that period of time was being able to go and speak with the employers, speak with the faculty at your institution. It's just a great time. But so I got to know at least a little bit about the culture of your community. Our regular listeners have certainly noticed a number of our recent guests are from densely urban populations, places like Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We recently had on our guest the superintendent of the St. Paul Public Schools. Those are urban institutions. Those are urban populations. And in those conversations, we talked about some of the unique challenges that face urban education. Now, Mid-Michigan College, as we referenced, you're in a rural part of the state of Michigan. Are there unique aspects to being in a rural community when it comes to leading a community college?
Absolutely. And it is my preference to live and work in a rural community.
Not just because of bass fishing, but just in general, right?
In general. And all of our children. My wife and I share 5 daughters. We all feel that these are the kinds of areas that we want to live in and work in and contribute to the communities that share these types of regions. But in terms of uniqueness, obviously our GNP, our economies are not flush. We get by. Our median level salary wages is not high, and some of the counties that we serve are amongst the lowest in the state. But we have bountiful natural resources. We are getting ready to invest in agriculture natural resources program that we feel will be a great fit for the region that we live in. Also, small business, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing on a smaller scale than what we're used to in most of the urban areas is a very important staple for this region. And we need to serve those companies. We need to make startup companies more likely to succeed. Our Small Business Development Center, which we house at the college, is a very important part of that work. I would like to introduce, as I have at my first community college, a small business incubator and an entrepreneurial program to go with our consulting that we offer at little or no charge through the SBDC. Also, change is harder. We're expanding our footprint. We've just annexed a new county. But as we grow that footprint, some of the people that are descendants of the forefathers and mothers of this community college see us growing into Mount Pleasant and into other counties and saying, wait a minute, are our tax dollars paying for things that are outside? And we say to them, we're expanding our enrollment, we're expanding our partnerships, and through the additional persons that we'll serve, we don't want to take anything away from the smaller rural Harrison campus. By the way, we've just spent tens of millions of dollars refurbishing. So for a small rural environment, our smaller of the two campuses is actually quite state of the art. And our Mount Pleasant newer campus for a rural region is remarkably modern. So we're very happy about that. We have to be careful to explain and be very transparent with the communities that we serve, especially as we're fundraising, to say we're investing in our region. And more of that region, not everything is going to be in one community or one county, nor can the college be almost entirely in one or two communities or counties. So these are some of the things that we're looking forward to putting into our strategic planning discussions, and certainly the voices that we'll bring in, we think will be very happy to join the conversation and to see that we're very serious about serving them as small business and industry better than we ever have before.
And like any organization, and certainly in business, we're always looking to expand our circle of influence. If we believe in our mission, we want to bring that mission and the benefits of our mission to as many people as we can. So certainly that expansion, as long as it's done in a thoughtful and strategic way and in a fashion that's going to benefit not just our new stakeholders, but ones that are already part of our community, and certainly bringing more people into the workforce, giving them the skills and abilities they need to be successful when they get there. So I think you're hitting it right on the head. As we talk about thinking about the future, about creating within ourselves the right skills, abilities, competencies, and so on, I think one of the many unique things about you, Tim, is that you're the president of an institution of higher education working on your PhD, right? So you mentioned earlier, you're in as much as you're a president, you're a student at the same time.
That's right.
That's got to give you a unique perspective, right? So you're a consumer of higher education at the same time that you're somebody responsible for delivering it. How does that perspective inform the decisions you make on behalf of your institution?
So I'm so glad you asked that. And among those things that are most important to me, both personally and professionally, are ways that allow us as academic institutions and as leaders of those, and not just the leaders, faculty and staff. Academic institutions are unique in that we really model and practice shared governance more than most. And by design, we need to do that. And finding ways, as I've mentioned before, to serve more people in more ways. We don't want to leave behind individuals that wouldn't have had an opportunity to upgrade their education and competencies had it not been for an affordable, accessible institution like ours. And as I think back on my own background as the oldest of 6 children, I was the only one of the 5 that I grew up with. We lost one as an infant, little baby sister, but I was the only one that was able to complete a traditional high school diploma. My younger brothers and sisters, for different reasons, had different paths and had to quit or chose to quit high school early, and for reasons that were justifiable and hard to think about even now. But if it wasn't for men and women, I get emotional thinking about it and even talking about it, but I want this message to come through, and every chance I get it to share it, I do. If it wasn't for the men and women at the community college level and at the adult learner level and at the career and technical education level and at levels that provide tutoring and counseling and help students get that GED or now that high school equivalency, and then go on. One of my sisters went on to become the highest award for a non-traditional student in the state of Illinois as a 30-something old single parent. One of my sisters went on to earn a master's degree as the equivalent of a pre-med degree. I have another brother that is finishing a college degree now. And none of that would have been possible had it not been for the kind of people that serve and teach and give of their time. Many people that serve our institution do so for free or as an adjunct or a part-time faculty who we could not deliver all of the programs that we do without adjunct faculty. I think of what else I could ask legislators for. Help us to pay them more. they deserve more, and they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because of their will to serve and to teach and to help others to take that next step up. And community colleges can be and should be the ideal place where all of that can come together. Now, where you go from here, as you've seen with a lot of slogans for community colleges, start here, go anywhere. But I would say about that, you don't have to start here. Come here anytime. Come here as an adult. Come here as a student that already has a master's degree. Come here to learn what you need to learn more about locally. I think community colleges offers more in more ways, and I'm honored to be part of that. For my work and my life's passion, community colleges are where it's at.
Well, and I love the fact that you use that word passion, because we can definitely hear the passion coming through in your voice, Tim, as you delivered that answer. And whether it's passion around the pathways that your siblings took, passion for your students, passion for your faculty, and advocating fearlessly and confidently for additional resources for them so that they can better their lives and be compensated for the great work that they're doing. I know that passion comes through and that dedication and emotion comes through day in and day out in your leadership at Mid-Michigan College. I think we've got time for one more question. And it is a question that we love asking of every single guest on the Tech Ed podcast. And that is, what is one piece of advice that you would offer to a student who is a sophomore in high school as they think about their future?
I would love to have more conversations with more students in that situation. I try to have as many as I can, but I also try to empower as many people and put as many people as the college can in positions to have more of those discussions. And for me, what I like to say is to start with pretty early in the conversation, what excites you? What are your dreams? And if there's not a whole lot there yet, that's okay. Because what we're getting ready to do over the next years that are ahead of you is find things if you haven't already found something. But right now, what are you most interested in, or what excites you, or what you see yourself doing professionally that you think you would love? And then begin to sort through that and unpack that. Because too often I think the mentors and the advisors and the counselors have counsel will travel. I have everything you need to know. And for me, the sooner, especially with a young person, the sooner they can start feeling free and comfortable with talking about their dreams and their passion at any level. And then, okay, there's the key that I would need to go from there and begin inserting potential areas of interest that would intersect with that. And then certainly talking about what sort of training and curriculum, and praising them and complimenting them for having this discussion right now. Because you know what? A lot of your peers don't see why these discussions are important right now. Please do this for me. Go back to them and tell them how important this discussion was for you, and encourage them to come and have a similar discussion with us.
Yeah, very, very important discussions, asking students what are their dreams, what are their passions. In the words of Tim Hood, our guest today on the Tech Ed podcast, president of Mid-Michigan College, ask students, what do they love to do? And what would they love to do? One of the things that we love to do here at the Tech Ed podcast is spend time with really, really fascinating people who aren't afraid to disrupt, people who look at education differently, people who have a genuine, and I mean genuine, passion for the work that they do. Tim, you fit that definition to a T. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thank you. It's been time well spent.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you liked this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.